Decades before 9/11, Americans talked about how they hadn't been attacked at home since Pearl Harbor. But that actually wasn't true. In 1942, the United States mainland was bombed by Japanese Imperial submarines and seaplanes on 3 separate occasions. And while none of the attacks were as horrific as Pearl Harbor, they did manage to strike panic into the communities located in Oregon and California. Today we learn about 3 times America was bombed on the mainland during World War II, and the unexpected outcome some 20 years later. So if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. February 23, 1942. The Japanese submarine I-17, captained by Commander Kozo Nishino, snuck into a channel near Elwood Oil Field, a large oil well and storage facility outside of Santa Barbara, California. After surfacing, Nishino ordered the sub's lone deck gun readied for action. Its crew took aim at Richfield Aviation fuel tank and started lobbing 16 shells at Elwood Beach. A skeleton crew on duty at the oil field heard the rounds hit, but thought they were hearing internal explosions, until one man spotted the I-17 off the coast. The submarine was so close to land that one oil worker thought it must be a cruiser or a destroyer, until he realized that only one gun was firing. The Japanese shells destroyed a derrick and a pump house, while the Elwood Pier and a catwalk suffered minor damage. When the shelling ended, the submarine submerged and fled to the open ocean, narrowly evading 3 aircraft and 2 destroyers as it escaped to the west. The brief shelling caused about $500 in damage to the oil field, but its implications were severe. It sparked invasion panic among American citizens not used to dealing with war on the home front, and caused hundreds to flee inland. Many feared that the event was a prelude to a full-scale attack on the west coast of the United States. Since several people in Santa Barbara claimed to have seen signal lights, a blackout was ordered for the rest of the night. These claims of signals were used to justify Franklin D. Roosevelt's internment of Japanese Americans, which began just 1 week later. A day after the attack, reports of enemy aircraft led to the so-called Battle of Los Angeles, in which American artillery was discharged over Los Angeles for several hours due to the mistaken belief that the Japanese were invading. The only attack on a mainland American military site during World War II occurred on June 21st, 1942, on the Oregon coast. After trailing American fishing vessels to bypass minefields, the Japanese submarine I-25 made its way to the mouth of the Columbia River. It surfaced near Fort Stevens, an antiquated army base that dated back to the 1800s. Just before midnight, the I-25, commanded by Meiji Tagami, used its 140mm deck gun to fire 17 shells at the fort. Tagami, who thought he was firing at a submarine base, later recalled that he did not use any gun sights at all. He just shot. Meanwhile, at the fort, chaos ensued. Men went tearing out of their barracks, heading to their guns and searchlights. But before any action could be taken, the fort commander ordered everyone to stand down, believing that the muzzle flashes of the fort's guns would only serve to more clearly reveal the fort's position. The plan worked. The I-25 shells left craters in the beach and marshland around the fort, damaging only the backstop of the baseball diamond about 70 to 80 yards from the facility's big guns. Casualties amounted to 1 soldier who cut his head rushing to his battle station. By about midnight, the attack ended, and the enemy vessel sailed off to the northwest. While the submarine fired 17 shells, witnesses on land only heard between 9 and 14 rounds. It was surmised that some shells might have been duds or fallen into the sea. Despite causing no significant damage, the attack certainly raised awareness of the threat of future strikes. Fallout from the attack created demands from the local civilian population that clear warnings be given in the event of future shellings. As it was, civilian defense officials had no machinery to warn the population. In the end, military and civilian defense officials agreed to communicate more closely to warn citizens of an attack. And rolls of barbed wire would be strung from Point Adams, near the mouth of the Columbia River, southward in case of an invasion. The barbed wire remained in place until the war's end. In September of 1942, the I-25 submarine tried again, this time with a plane equipped with bombs. Many submarines at the time carried a single float plane used to search for targets or collect battle damage assessments. The float plane was housed in a streamlined watertight hangar installed forward of the conning tower. Its wings, fins, and floats were removed, and the horizontal tail folded upward in order for it to fit inside. 2 launching rails extended forward from the hangar to the bow, from which the reassembled float plane was catapulted aloft by compressed air. To recover the aircraft, the pilot had to make an open ocean landing and taxi to the starboard side, where a retractable crane hoisted it back on board the submarine. It took a well-trained crew 20 to 30 minutes to launch or recover the aircraft, depending on sea conditions. These were risky and dangerous minutes for the surface submarine, which lay virtually defenseless against an air attack during that period. The pilot assigned to I-25, Nobuo Fujita, had proposed that these planes could be used in an offensive capacity. The Imperial Navy brass agreed to the plan, and his plane was equipped with incendiary bombs. In what became known as the Lookout Air Raids, the I-25 launched its Yokosuka E-14Y float plane near Brookings, Oregon, in the hope of starting a forest fire. For several days, bad weather delayed launching the float plane, but early on September 9, 1942, conditions improved. Captain Tagami summoned Fujita to the conning tower, where he nodded to the periscope and ordered, "Take a look, Fujita, and tell me what you think." Fujita did so and responded quickly, "Captain, it looks good. I think we can do it today." Captain Tagami smiled and remarked, "Fine. In just a few more minutes, you'll make history. You will be the first person ever to bomb the United States of America. If all goes well, Fujita, you will not be the last." The attack was launched as Fujita and his crewman, Petty Officer Shoji Okuda, catapulted from the I-25 and flew east toward Mount Emily. Once over the forested land, Fujita released his 170-pound thermite incendiary bombs. Meanwhile, Fire Warden Howard Gardner was stationed in his lookout tower on Mount Emily and watched the attack unfold. Gardner heard what sounded like a car backfiring. Scanning the foggy skies, he caught a glimpse of a small airplane circling above and called to the ranger station to report it. Later, as the fog lifted, Gardner spotted smoke and immediately sounded the alarm and called for help. After gathering equipment, he took off on a shortcut through the rugged terrain in the direction of the fire and was later joined by Nebraska forestry student Keith Johnson. They arrived at the scene where they found smoldering fires covering a circular area about 50 to 75 feet across. They quickly controlled the fires, examined the area, and found a crater at the center that showed signs of intense heat. Fragments of the bomb had been scattered over a radius of about 100 feet. One of the blazing pieces lodging in a decayed stump, setting it afire. After finding fragments of metal casings and thermite pellets, it was concluded that a bomb had caused the damage, but it was assumed that it had been dropped accidentally by an American plane. The next day, however, searchers found the bomb nose cone and casing fragments with Japanese markings, confirming its origin. Meanwhile, the small town of Brookings was buzzing with rumor. Residents heard of the bombing, but could only speculate on details. Despite their efforts at secrecy, officials watched helplessly as newspapers across the country ran stories that included more details than the government had hoped to release. A second similar seaplane attack near the town of Port Orford yielded similar results. If the forest had been as dry as normal for that time of year, the Japanese plan might have worked, leaving forest fires that diverted hundreds of firefighters and large amounts of money from the war effort, while triggering panic in the population. Bad weather and heavy seas precluded a final bombing attack. Captain Tagami canceled the mission, having decided to spend the rest of his patrol time in attacks on shipping. On October 11th, I-25 fired her last torpedo and returned to Yokosuka. Fujita was hailed as a hero at home and served out the war training kamikaze pilots. Oddly enough, in 1962, the town of Brookings invited Fujita to the city he tried to destroy. This resulted in a friendship that lasted the rest of the man's life. When Fujita, his wife Ayoko, and son Yoshi arrived in Brookings, they were presented with the key to the city, and the next day rode at the head of the Azalea Festival parade as Grand Marshals. At the festival, Fujita presented his family's 400-year-old samurai sword to the city as a symbol of regret. A special treat was in store for Nobuo and his son that afternoon. They climbed into a Piper light aircraft and flew over Mount Emily and the forest he had tried to set afire 2 decades before. When asked if he would like to take the controls, Fujita eagerly accepted. Fujita made a number of additional visits to Brookings, serving as an informal ambassador of peace and friendship. In 1985, Fujita invited 3 students from Brookings to Japan. During the visit of the Brookings Harbor High School students, Fujita received a dedicatory letter from an aide of President Ronald Reagan with admiration for your kindness and generosity. Fujita returned to Brookings in 1990, 92, and 95. In 92, he planted a tree at the bomb site as a gesture of peace. In 1995, he moved the samurai sword from Brookings City Hall into the new library's display case. He was made an honorary citizen of Brookings several days before his death on September 30th, 1997, at the age of 85. In October 1998, his daughter Yuriko buried some of Fujita's ashes at the bomb site, and today his sword still holds its place of honor in the main reading room of the town library, and I can think of no better place to display this notable piece of history. Thank you for watching, folks. I'll see you next time as we explore more curious history. Take care.